Jim is the director of the Michigan State Housing Development Authority's Development Division. He's responsible for the management of the state's Michigan federal and state funded housing and community development programs, design of housing, neighborhood policy, and facilitating the state's community planning and development activities. He has more than 25 years of experience in the field of urban planning, working for public organizations and consulting with private sector firms, with well-established specialties in urban infill, working as on core-based codes and brownfield development. You may not know this, but at one time Jim was the planner for Monroe, and Monroe was one of the very first large-scale urban communities in the state. Mason Run, the cross-land communities developed. Jim had a very critical role in that. So, Jim, go ahead. Introduce Dan too. We're also very fortunate to have Dan Gilmartin here. Dan is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Michigan Municipal League. Through his work with communities, Dan is recognized as a leader in the fields of urban revitalization, placemaking, local government reform, and transportation policy. Under his leadership, the League was reorganized as a cool place to work in 2011. Model D Media recently referred to him as an urban thinker with an eye for the small, often unnoticed changes that can make places out of streets and buildings. Dan serves as a member of the Michigan Future Inc. Leadership Council. He also served for 4 years as lead advocate for Michigan communities in Lansing and Washington, where he concentrated on a number of key issues. Dan is also the host of the Prosperity Agenda on News Talk Radio 760, which is Michigan's highest rated talk radio program. And Dan and Jim both have been very strong advocates and supporters of the Michigan Congress for New Urbanism, for which I'm very grateful. Thank both of you for coming to our symposium.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to come and talk about some of the changes going on in the state and some of the directions we're headed in. We're going to take a little, Jim and I present a lot one after the other, but we're going to try to tag team today. We'll see how it goes. But, and what we're trying to do is a little bit something different than what we've done in the past. And we're trying to talk today about some of the changes that need to take place for a lot of the stuff that we've been dealing with all day to happen on a broader scale, on a more grand scale. One of those things, maybe at the heart of all that, is the concept of risk. And when we talk about risk, the developers really understand risk, but the risk is happening also from a bank perspective, from a local government perspective, from a citizen perspective. In many cases, our systems that we find ourselves in 2014 are often old, a bit outdated. Certainly our governing structures are a heck of a lot different than they were in the mid-20th century when it comes to some of this stuff. So one of the things that Jim and I have talked about in the past is how do we get beyond sort of where we're at, and how do we put something, structure into place to a lot more of the stuff that happens. At the League, we like to talk about the metaphor of City Hall acting as a host of the party, not the life of the party. And I think in many cases, we think of ourselves still as a life in terms of providing all the services and all the direction that everything goes on. And where we see great things happening in communities within the state of Michigan, outside the state of Michigan, around the country and around the world, it's more of a concept of locality basically creating a platform for cool stuff to happen. And it's sort of getting out of the way and moving forward. So we're going to talk about the Michigan experience here and what's happening at the state level all the time, and from time to time, just to handle the majority of this from a local perspective. But if we do our job correctly, it'll be wow. If not, we apologize in advance. So. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks and good afternoon, Dan. And to the rest of you all. So if you learn nothing else from this presentation today, that website at the bottom is where you can find the information about what placemaking is happening in Michigan at myplace.org. What you also don't see, this is a still frame, what you also don't see on this slide is it doesn't say State of Michigan. because this is not a state of Michigan website. In fact, I want to give Dan and about 25 other organizations credit who are members of what's known as the Sense of Place Council. That is the group of trade organizations, or what we call partner organizations, that really got placemaking, as we know it now, going in Michigan prior to the start of this current administration in Lansing. 2004, I think, right? Was when we got started talking about some things. We had Bob involved and some of the other key practitioners in urbanism coming in to start that process rolling, and it got to a point where when the governor was elected in 2010, he made the fortunate decision of bringing a number of policy people into his administration who were versed in placemaking. This slide, this is not a political statement, okay, because you may or may not support this governor, but what's important is what was said in the room in Dan's building about a month and a half after he took office. And if you can see that, you can see what it says, but if you can't, I'm going to read it to you. I quote, "I don't separate placemaking from economic development. They are intertwined." And that is the lead for which Governor Snyder authorized and gave us the charge as state agencies to create and execute a placemaking initiative. The lead is from the top. And like in many progressive state activities, having champions at the top is critical to get it started. So that's very important. So now what's behind it? Some of you have perhaps been in some of the trainings and in some of the programs. I've seen a few of the training practitioners here today, CNU Michigan members included as well. So in a nutshell, this is what's behind it. Being direct, it's important, and the initiative has as its goal the shift in the paradigm to place-based livability. Now, how to get to that and how we do it, that's a process. But our internal rules are, one, we will not be or look like another government program. Because if we are, we'll never get out of the gate. Okay? So, through the Sense of Place Council members, like the League, like the Realtors Association, like the Credit Union League, who has just become a member of the Sense of Place Council, and so many other private and public and nonprofit organizations, that is the implementation mechanisms of placemaking in Michigan. Market-based and driven is the challenge that the governor has given us, which is it can't be just theoretical, it has to be on the ground, shown to be market potential and data-driven. And return on investment is the ultimate measurement. So when Bob gave us an email a couple days ago saying, the charge for you as speakers is to talk to this audience about why, or respond to what some developers, perhaps in Southeast, maybe in Michigan, or across Michigan, say, this can't be done. What I'm going to show you in a few slides is what we know from the research and practice, which in fact is the huge volume of evidence that shows that not only can it be done, but if we ignore the trends, we are destined to remain static and not improve in prosperity, which is talent, retention, and attraction. This slide, you've heard this a couple times from speakers earlier today. This is the Jim Tischler slide of showing you that just like the federal government and just like local governments, the state of Michigan's resource base is growing smaller. And the open question is, do we have enough butter to spread across the entire slice of toast? Okay? In the previous decades, as Mr. Kunstler might say, when it was cheap energy and cheap financing, when there was plenty of dollars, then the state governments, as well as locals, could spread the money across in every corner of the area. Those days are over, and I see it. How many of you drove to here today to the program? Raise your hand. How many of you met a pothole today? Come on, 4 of you? Okay, I think more of you. Okay, there we go. Well, it's that philosophy of work, isn't it not? Is it not? Okay. Is there enough transportation money to pay for the job? That's the place, that's what we face today. And so our view of how we finance and support projects in local communities and in a regional setting has to change. And that's also part of placemaking too. I'll get to that in a few slides. This is Michigan's growth strategy. This was presented and approved by the administration and the governor 3 years ago, okay? And does this have a pointer to it, Bob? Is there a little pointer thing on it? Maybe not. I know. Okay. Oh, yeah, there. Okay. I'll juggle all of them here. Let's see.
That does have one on it.
Let's see. Oh, there it is.
Right in the front.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So you remember when I showed you the governor has placemaking and economic development intertwined? Well, there's economic development and there's placemaking. And in one side, that's the state of Michigan's growth strategy. And that's being effected through all the departments and being supported by members of the Sense of Place Council. This program, the My Place program, has some major components to it. It starts with a base of knowledge and understanding, which we call the placemaking curriculum. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But based on that curriculum, what has been happening over the past 2 years now or so, again, the MML, all the State of Place Council members have been very involved with this, is in doing a tremendous amount of training to get local electeds, local appointeds, citizens, nonprofits, understanding of the basic principles of place and placemaking, all right? What's recently been starting to occur is implementation tools and dollars being offered by the state. So some of you may be in a community or maybe in an organization who has a grant from my agency, for example, to do a residential target market analysis. That's a particular type of approach which gets at place-based housing building types and is directly tied to the placemaking initiative. And ultimately, rising out of it all will be the policy changes which are and will be forthcoming, okay? Now this curriculum. When the governor gave us the charge and we sat as the interagency group with Sense of Place Council members, one of the first questions was, if we're going to build a program to promote good new urbanist placemaking development in Michigan, how are we going to do it? There's a tremendous amount of knowledge in this room and in so many other circles. Here's the problem. It's all across the map. It's fragmented. Is there one location where a citizen, let alone an appointed, an elected, or anybody else, can sit or go and get some measure of exposure of the components and how it comes together? Now, there might be, and if there is something of what we've done, I'm interested to hear it, okay? But having not seen that in our research, we decided to try to bring this together. And so what you're looking at is 6 modules which start with the basics of place and placemaking. We are talking today, Dan and I, about what are the economic implications and benefits of place. The third module is what is place, aka the charter of the new urbanism. Okay? What's module 4? Form, planning, and regulation. I think you know what that means too, this audience. Module 5 is collaborative public involvement placemaking. That's shredding. And finally, module 6, after going through this process, is where the state's tools, financial, process, and technical assistance tools are then offered to communities on engaging, planning, executing, and completing place-based projects. Okay? I'm pretty sure you've seen this image. Is there anybody who hasn't seen this image? Okay, good. It's the transect. Now, here's what's interesting. So you know the place types. We don't call them T-zones in Michigan. To you, I will, because you're knowledgeable about it. And so is Dan. Okay? My boss, Gary, took him about 4 months to get that understanding. Okay? But to the public, we call them place types. Yeah. They're place types. Okay? Now, what's images at the bottom? You all seen Pure Michigan ads, right? Pure Michigan is one of the top national advertising campaigns. You're looking at images out of Pure Michigan. Yes, the subliminal approach of Pure Michigan is to promote place. Okay? And as you are going to see over time, there's going to be more and more, more and more, one more, come on, there we go. More and more over on the right side. More images of T5, downtowns and nodes, showing images of activity so people can see that this is what our cities are like. And of course T6, urban core places, and perhaps T4 as well. All right? We are literally tying many of our state programs to a transect orientation. All right? Now, you've heard a couple of people talk today about what the market wants, or perhaps what the market doesn't want. I'm going to be direct and brief as I can. When you look at all the data, national, regional, down into Michigan, all the data points in the direction that the market wants place. They want the building types in place. They want the accessibility of place. They want the amenities of place. They want live, work, and play options in place. Period. Okay? Largely it's due to this separate, or these are generations in society, okay? Some of you in this audience are baby boomers, okay? Some of you are X generation members. A growing number of you are millennials. And the two bookends from the research, the downsizing boomers and the millennials rising and now being in the labor market and being in the household market, are driving these trends, and they're dramatic. And frankly, to the statement that Bob gave to us as presenters of some developers not saying that the market doesn't want it, I got to believe some denial out there, because when you look at it from the numbers, it's clear and it's dramatic, okay? Those two, this is a survey on a table run by MSU, a national survey last year about placemaking. All of those elements there that incorporating placemaking will increase economic activity, improve opportunities for jobs, improve quality of life, positively affect home prices, enhance sense of community belonging, and attract new people to the community, are supported by more than 70% of all respondents nationwide. And Michigan sample too, okay? They understand it. Some, as I've heard in the past, have said, well, we're Michigan and we're different. Okay? You know, we're not like some of these other states. We're different, we're Michigan. Well, we are, by 2 percentage points. Okay? Because when you look at our household types and how they break down, just like every other state in the nation and every other region and metro in the nation, we are seeing declines in households with children, family households with children, and subsequent rise in households without children, mostly single or two-person households, okay? And when you look and get into analysis of what those households want and preferences, they more and more and more do not want detached single family on large lot. What they want is attached residential or in the form of row, town, live work, loft, and mixed units, of mixed use, excuse me, okay, of various dimensions. The problem is that the product isn't there, so they can't choose it, so they choose existing product, and the statistics show all this revolving around detached single family and large scale multifamily, okay? Since the end of World War II, we've built places based on the assumption of 50% households having children. And by 2040, that number is going to be less than 25%. Yet, as a society, we still think that way, don't we? That has to change. Okay? The millennials, about 2/3 of them, they decide to go to place first, then look for the job. That's what the national data shows. Just heard Peter Allen, great presentation. What I'm about to show you supports what he said about the millennial generation. Okay? MSU survey a couple years ago. Where are graduates going? Okay? Well, guess what? We know that about 63% of our graduates go to other places across the nation. That means we have a fairly decent retention rate. We're one of the top 5. But of those 63% and change that go, we know where they're going. Now, you're looking at the states, but I'm betting in your mind you're thinking about where in the states are they going? Where are they going in Illinois? That's where they're going to in Chicago. That map, which we took from the previous survey and went into demographic research with our consultants, that's a dot map. It's tough to see at distance, but those dots are aggregations of 200 households, the center point of an aggregation of 200 households. In red, the householder is a single person or two-person household where the household head is millennial and about 5 years into the X generation, or what we know as young professionals. What's in blue are the family households, okay? So can you see where the talent's aggregating? How many of you guys know Chicago? You probably know better than I do, but I can see downtown there. Can you? Can you see the Loop? Can you see Wrigleyville? Okay, what other cities can you see? The downtowns. If you overlay the CTA map, would you see the connectivity? Right? This is what started to tell us that we have to get better places in Michigan. Okay? Not just from a form, we already know that from design, but from a talent attraction retention standpoint. This is economic development we're talking about here, folks. All right? And the two go together. Now here's Grand Rapids. Probably tough to see at distance, but Grand Rapids has been fairly successful, but not to the extent of Chicago, right? That's Detroit. You see Ann Arbor, don't you? And Ferndale, and Wyandotte, Birmingham.
I should point them out. We've had some out-of-state people here.
Okay, Ann Arbor.
The red ones.
The red ones, yep. Ferndale, Birmingham, Wyandotte. Downtown and Midtown, here's the Woodward Corridor. There's the East Jeff Corridor. Now look at the large swaths.
Well, and this speaks to the question earlier about, in the previous presentations, what are the millennial urbanites going to do when they have kids? And that's a big question right now. I think, quite frankly, they're going to stay more urban. Someone up front answered that they're going to hold down the fort and demand change where they live right now. I think there's a lot of truth to that. But to the extent that they do choose schools, to the extent that they do choose a single-family home, they're going to Naperville if they're in Chicago. I recall, if you're from this area, I was at a League of Women Voters meeting in Troy a couple of years ago, and a woman got up and said, what can we do in Troy to keep young people here? Young people are leaving. And I said, not much. It's a wonderful bedroom community, but 25-year-olds aren't looking for 3,000 square foot homes with finished basements and a good school district. What you could do is make sure that Berkeley works, and make sure that Ferndale works, and make sure that Midtown Detroit works, because that's where they're going to start out. And this is the great stretch I think we've got to get into, because typically we sit in a room, we talk about planning, and we talk about communities, or we talk about economic development. They're one and the same now, and we've got to figure that out, because this is how you win. There was a lot of MBAs from U of M and MSU and Wayne State tending bar in Chicago, rather than working for CPA firms in Detroit, because they're choosing that urban lifestyle. And that's what we're up against. We're exporting that talent, we're exporting that opportunity, that entrepreneurship, everything that goes with the second largest generation we've ever had. We've got to compete for that. And that's economics, plain and simple, period. So when we talk about taxes and regulations, we talk about creating jobs in Michigan and quite frankly around the country, and then we stop that conversation. It has less to do with that right now. Anybody came home and said, Mom or Dad or sister or brother or friend, I'm moving to Chicago because it's cheap. The regulatory environment's wonderful. Come on. What world are we living in? That doesn't work that way anymore.
Remember, 2/3, that's the research, 2/3 of our millennials go to a location without a job, and then they entrepreneur to get the job. Now, I was at the Governor's Economic Summit on Monday. A lot of good things happened there. But with a lot of practitioners in the economic development and the workforce development arenas, they don't see this. They see it as a process. X plus Y is Z, okay? If we just grease the skids on lower taxes and other things, it'll happen magically. But that's not reality. Reality is going to a place, and what are those places like? They're the same type of places you saw in all the good plans today. They are mixed use, mixed income, multiple activities, locations.
I think a good example is when Audi of America and Bentley moved out of Auburn Hills. They moved to Washington, D.C. into the most expensive office building of all times because it was on transit stop, and that's where they could get their employees to want to work. They weren't in Auburn Hills because it was a low rent or because they got a tax subsidy. They wanted to go where the transit was.
I was involved in that, and the governor came down at the time and threw every possible abatement at them, and they said, no, we got to go to the town. You see that time and time again. Anybody from Midlands? Midland area don't work there? Dow. I mean, Dow is the Babe Ruth of the chemical industry. They're literally after the top student at Caltech and MIT every year. It used to be, sure, I'll go to Dow, where do I sign up? And now we're starting to say, I don't want to live in mid-Michigan. So Dow just recently opened up a 400 staff office in Chicago. That would scare the hell out of people there. Because they're in the talent business. The interesting thing is that Midland is a veteran community, and the older communities of Bay City and Saginaw had this sort of civil war going on for a while. They're actually starting to communicate a little bit more because those folks are trying to communicate are looking at places like Bay City, Midland, older communities on the water, data schools, and they say, that's kind of cool. That might work for me a little bit better, and there's some synergy going on around that. But this is happening everywhere across the globe.
Yep. That's right, and this slide covers it. We are not alone. We are in the talent attraction competition business, okay? This came out while we were just in part of finalizing the first level of the placemaking curriculum. And it's another state, Massachusetts. Yeah, somebody might call them, you know, a little leftist up that way, but the bottom line, if you look at their numbers, a lot of college grads, a lot of good place locations, and what they did right from the top from their governor is make a policy statement, which is, we're going to build 10,000 units a year through 2020 in an effort to keep our young professionals. Now, if you want the money, and this is what gets interesting, we're going to come back to this in terms of the state's policy, because this is a message to local governments. Look at the bottom here. If you want the money, local units, change your system. Okay? Adopt as of right, or what you'll hear me say, by right permitting process, administrative review for these projects. In other words, local units, set your form on your corridors, in your neighborhoods, in your districts, code it as form, then get out of the way and let the market act. That's what this was the first of a few states that have started to do that. And frankly, we are behind if we do not. Now, walk score. How many of you, I think walk score came up a couple times in at least one of the presentations today. All right? So now, let's talk about what walk score means from an investment return standpoint. Well, there have been multiple evaluations of walk score, but the range is anywhere between $700 to $3,000 increase as you go up in walk score by point. Okay? Metro DC, spent a lot of research there. Okay? 43 very walkable places, where there used to be 2. Now, what's very walkable? Chris Lineberger will tell you that's at 70, I think it's 70.5, I'll say 70, and up is very walkable. You'll see a slide in a minute on that. In every metro, there needs to be 4 to 6 very walkable places. Walk score, based on what Chris Lineberger's research has done, shows that there are 4 walkable places right now in Metro Detroit. Birmingham's 1. 4, where there should be 16 to 20. Where are those 16 to 20 going to be? That's an open question, isn't it? Okay? You probably can't see it, the detail, but up at the top, right up there, is where he takes those walkable urban places and segregates them into 4 categories based upon 70, a little higher, and the highest. And what this data is showing is that the higher walk score you are, the more value across any of the real estate metrics you have, whether it's rents, sales, per square foot occupancies, you name it, it's there across all the categories, directly correlated. Now, this is an interesting slide. Had some conversation with Dan about this. This is also a walk score slide. This is the top 40 cities in Michigan by population, their walk scores, right there. And what's over here is the change in taxable value between 2006 and 2011. Now, most communities lost taxable value in Michigan because we were in the midst of the 10-year recession here. Okay? So the way you read this slide is that a lower loss is better. Okay? That curve is statistically significant, which shows that the higher walk score you are as a community, you had a lower loss of taxable value during the recession. Now, here's the other interesting point. Ready for this? If you follow that curve, where does it intersect? Just above 70, which isn't that consistent with how Chris Lineberger defined his walkable urban places? And perhaps that is an interesting number to start focusing on. What areas in your cities are walk score 70 or higher? And are those opportunities for walkable urban places? From a municipal perspective, the return on investments are clear as well. Okay, Smart Growth America there's been a number of research efforts here. The latest out of SGA showing out of municipal budgets that 38% is the average national across the nation savings on infrastructure costs by building in place orientation or building walkable density. That's a minimum. It ranges from 38 to 50% savings on infrastructure. 10% savings on service delivery. These are issues that are Dan's bread and butter with his members, okay? And the issues are, one more, revenues, tenfold increase. Some of you may know Joe Minikazi, his work, tenfold increase by building place, by building dense, walkable urban form, Okay? This is the numbers.
These types of things are the message that really needs to get out there, because when you do this kind of thing, you save money, you're more efficient. All the things that we talk about that we want to do nationally, and certainly within Michigan, and certainly in communities and regions, we're not doing. We're not doing enough of this. And for some reason, we can debate what those reasons are, but this has been sort of, the concept of what we're doing here has sort of been bastardized into being something different than economic, and something different than efficiency. And I think it's incumbent upon people in this room and outside this room, we really got to pound this stuff home. And you combine these numbers with the likes and dislikes of the millennial generation, and quite frankly, retiring boomers, and where they're looking to live, and how they want to live right now, and how they'll be living over the next 10 years, it doesn't make any sense to continue what we're doing. But somehow, from a political perspective, a lot of the places where, a lot of the time where the place where I spend a lot of time, it hasn't gotten through yet, which is a difficult thing to swallow at times. This makes sense in a whole bunch of different ways that we've got to push.
Okay, some of you may have seen this curve as well. This is out of the lesser research, okay? The red curve is the typical value projection out of conventional development, okay? What's in blue is the value curve for walkable, for place-based development, okay? Now, the real nut of the issue is right here, because conventional development, the real estate development industry, needs return fast, okay? All right? And they get it, don't they? And what happens over time? Once again, in this audience, I think you know that answer, okay? But from a policy and frankly from a effective and economic standpoint, this is the curve that we should want. This is the curve that not only municipally, but also the developer should look at to say, my added value over time makes a difference and hits it, okay? And there's a number of them, but we need more. We need to grow the market of our good developers. To most developers, this is what place-based or walkable projects look like, okay? Here's a gap. Sue Mosey told you that. You heard it from Peter, maybe earlier today. And a large part, the gap results because the projects don't have comps. The market players don't have much to base what's being proposed because there ain't much that's been built recently. So the big question is, we have to go to traditional systems of valuation, and it leaves us a gap. Okay? So how do we solve the gap? Well, this is where it kind of gets interesting. Going back to my boss, the governor, and our little placemaking program. Because if you think of our agencies, but that's the alphabet soup of state agencies. I think you probably know some of them, but it's DOT, MEDC, Economic Development Corporation, MISHDA, that's my shop, DEQ, MDARD, Ag and Rural Development, and DNR. Okay? Between us, that's the 6 agencies in the growth group. And if we look at our financial resources not as 6 different pots, but one investment pool, we have a pretty fair chunk of money to spend, don't we, on an annual basis? We do. In fact, we're getting at research right now. Smart Growth America did a national study a year and a half ago. The federal government's investment in the real estate market is $450 billion annually. We want to find out what our investment foothold in the real estate market is. We were taking bets internally. I'm not going to tell you what it is, okay? But we have a large presence as state expending the public's dollars in projects. Now think about what the governor's request is. Make it data-driven, market-based, focus on return on investment. Well, our response has been the best market returns are in walkable place projects because the data shows us, the models show us that. Okay, and so now what we are looking to do is to pool our resources and make investments in locations targeted to centers, nodes, and corridors. And now you see the transect again. I'm going to explain this slide to you. This is in a slide, the developing state policy on financing projects, be they infrastructure or private development support, where the greater emphasis and investment comes as you get more focused and targeted in centers, nodes, and corridors within targeted communities. Okay? You with me on that? All right? What I'm saying is the state is organizing to make its investments to fill the gaps because we need to spend the public's money to get the best investment return. And that's an argument that's never been made before. It's always been, everybody gets a little piece. But when there's not enough to give everybody a little piece, we have to think differently about how we spend the public's money. And spending public money means we have to put it to the best return. And you guys are key practitioners who understand, and like others, that the best return is in targeted locations. Now, this might be tough for you to see, because it's a little light on the coloration, but this was an early map we did. This is a transect map of the state of Michigan. Okay? We've been working on this. The question is, where do we target? Where do we target the resources? Of course, centers, nodes, and corridors, yes, but where? So we looked at that and said, that's a little odd, so now we got a little more specific, and now what you're looking at is our latest internal creation, okay, as of the end of last year. This is not public yet. You're getting a first shot at looking at this. Here's what's interesting, okay? Essentially, you're seeing the T4, 5, 6 zones in Michigan. We are about to have a contract with Scott Bernstein and the folks at C&T. We're going to bring informed data into this in order to get to targeting nodes and corridors and centers within these areas. The geography of this is not census tract like we did before, like you saw before, but it is census block group. Why block group? Because block groups best approximate geographically neighborhood. Okay? And so our objective is to get to a targeted investment map where prioritization of investment dollars go to those place-based projects, oh, by the way, which come out of good master plan, stakeholder engaged, charrette facilitated, form plan and coded plans where the projects rise out of them. Right? Who's going to help us to do this? Well, of course, it's not just us as a state, as I mentioned to you. The governor's not going to come out 3 weeks from now and announce this is going to happen. Nope, that's not what's going to happen. It's coming up through the constituency, the sense of place council members, Dan's organization, the regional organizations, the realtors, the planners, the AIA, Michigan CU, all those 25 members of the sense of place council. I think we probably got everybody in the state, our trade organization, except the home builders. We got to work on those guys. Okay, so those guys, it's through the trade organizations where this support is rising. Locus, how many of you know of Locus, Smart Growth America's developer organization? So you might know that next week they're in town, Chris Lambert is in town, Frank Land Recruiting Mission. Locus wants to and is starting to create a Michigan chapter. We need to grow the market of developers who, like you, and who you know, who are practiced and can engage in place-based walkable development. And our interface, Peter I think may have mentioned this in his presentation, is redevelopment communities. Okay, RRC is going to become the state's way of having communities show that they meet thresholds. You can think of it as an ISO program for communities. If you have a good plan process, perhaps which is a charrette facilitated and form code, and you have good process, meaning administrative permitting by right, and if you have sites available and ready to work with developers, you might then be at a position where you meet thresholds so that if there's a project, you rise to priority funding for state investments. That way, set the code, municipality, get out of the way, developers come in, get the projects financed. If it's a great project in a targeted location, state comes in, makes its investments, fills the gap, voila. You hear that?
Well, I think it's certainly the right direction. And some of this plan certainly is still aspirational, I would say, because, I said earlier in terms of some of this stuff coming together, the politics of this don't add up right now, and that's one of the last hurdles we've got to get over. I think we're figuring out the policy of it. I think the state agencies are understanding it, the local governments are understanding it, the people in the industries are understanding it, but we've got to make sure that we get the whole process moving in the same direction. Because one of the things we've got to make sure is that the state is willing to sort of put up a shot on some of this stuff, because that's been an issue in previous years. So we've got to keep moving in that direction. But the plan and the aspects of what we do right here make a great deal of sense, will allow us the ability to go out and compete for that talent, for those people, for those jobs, in a way that we've not been able to compete for a number of years. So something to certainly get involved in, certainly be a part of it. And I would echo Jim, if you're a developer or anything that looks or walks or talks like a developer, check in with the local folks, because I think that organization is going to play a very important role in this as we move along, because it'll help make the business sense and the business argument for a lot of the building.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
Let's take some questions. I think Michigan is leading the country from the top, from the governor's office, really, in for placemaking. Let's take some questions.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous you're going to prioritize funding by T-zone, and then you're getting Scott Bernstein, CMT. Paul, what are you going to have Scott do?
Well, that's a loaded question, isn't it? So we're going to do so, frankly, I'll be direct, we're going to play with some data. When you look at census data, even down to block group level, you see mostly socioeconomic information, okay, which is good and is valuable. What you don't see is form, okay? And we think that's critical, to identify not just areas where there's socioeconomic need or benefit, but areas where there is good or appropriate or opportunity to infill building mass. And what Scott's got out of his shop is a database, a cross-reference database where he's taken, and across all the metros, as I've understood, across the United States, and he's taken it down to parcel level where he's on corridor and parcel basis codified three dimensions on building form. And so if we get that into generic or average form envelopes in these targeted locations, we have the ability to see perhaps what those areas look like in their dimensions and understand where the opportunities to increase form or analyze economic data by that three-dimensional or that, shall I say, the spatial element, where you can't get it just from the census data. And because it's tied to census data, it can connect. So we're going to do some playing. Okay.
Massachusetts, you said, had funding for eligible locations, which presumably is based on form. How did they, I guess, measure or determine what the eligible locations are?
I don't have an answer for you on that, because we've been so focused internally here on what we want to do. But actually, that's an interesting point I might want to follow up. Other than seeing that and having some brief conversations with their Secretary of not Community Development, we have not had any further contact with them. Okay. Okay.
I mean, one thing that Massachusetts and some other places did is that their overall development strategy was around talent attraction and retention, high-tech business. They looked at their amazing public and private higher ed system there in Massachusetts and decided that was something they were going to build off of, similar to what happened in the Research Triangle down in the Carolinas. And they invested in it, quite frankly. That's where it started. And the rest of the stuff came a little bit later. But understanding that that is their bread and butter, and that's what's going to take them economically, they went and did that. It was something interesting in Chicago. Anybody Chicago's here, or people who work at one? Okay, so right now they're trying to figure out how to rebuild the L. And all the problems, I go there and I hear all the problems they've got, and we wish you had your problems, right? But you know, when I heard the mayor speak one time, he said the #1 reason why people come here is the access to talent. That's what brings businesses here. And talent wants the talent wants this to move around like this. So I've got to figure that out. In Michigan, we haven't taken that path.
Right.
In Michigan, we've tried to take the Alabama and Mississippi path, and it's not gotten done too well by us. So this is all welcome news in terms of changing around and making us competitive in a different way. That's the after 5 o'clock conversation. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with the inclusion of the walk score and the 1-mile radius. I attended one of these events in Benton Harbor, Michigan. That's where I'm from.
Yep.
And I think that it's a mistake to leave out the idea of walk appeal, because a lot of these suburban environments that are backing residential against these sprawl environments, you can walk to it, but it's a very unpleasant walk. And the walk score can be very high, but
I've got it.
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you know, walk a mile. That's something that's really important to us.
Excellent point. Matt Lerner and his crew in Seattle, okay, are aware of that. We brought it to our attention because we use my agency, MISHDA, if you are familiar with the low-income housing tax credit, you know that we have what's called a qualified allocation plan. Developers come in if they want to apply for tax credits to do low-income housing projects, and they have to score. And one of our criteria that we use is walk score. Okay, so we're updating our QAP right now, and late last fall, we had a discussion with he and a member of staff, and we raised that issue, which is we have concern about the relative inability to differentiate between access to walkable locations in this location type and this location type. And the response to that he provided, and the staff at the time, was, we're going to address that. So a updated algorithm, you'll probably hear it as an announcement, but there is an update coming right now to the WalkScore algorithm to address that.
Yeah, there's a competitor out there, WalkScore, too. I've forgotten the name. Somebody may know it.
They get to that issue as well. And it reminds me a little bit how it came. We tend to talk about talent as well as the four-year degree. And certainly everyone with a four-year degree is talented, and there are a lot of people that don't have a bar. But when you look at per capita income in a region, for example, it's a one-to-one. So you've got to look at that in the aggregate, the macro sense. When you get down to actually figuring out, what are we going to put on East Street, what are we going to put on West Street, you got to think a little bit differently. There's something out there.
I did the walk score sitting at a jet the other day in the tarmac of Detroit Airport. I had a walk score of about 45.
Yeah, yeah. So another one, I don't know, we've got some...
Closer to the bags thing than I'm at my house, so that's a problem.
We had some Traverse City folks here, because I know a couple good friends of mine. Perhaps they knew this. Downtown TC is a walk score of 98. Where's Russ? Did you know that? Maybe he's gone.
He just walked out.
They left, okay. 98 walk score, okay? And so about a month ago, we were sitting down with the Pure Michigan folks, because they wanted to start to bring placemaking information into the Pure Michigan campaign. And I said, why don't you take downtown TC and start showing images with a number in the background, 98. And there are other downtowns. Ann Arbor is going to score high, okay? Because think about this. Because wasn't here is that million talent choosing a place to live. Us older people might not realize it, but they are looking at walk score.
Realtors know about it now because they advertise in the home listing.
So
what the walk score is, I've seen that listed.
So if we advertise with a walk score number, that might get interesting response, eh?
Anybody else?
I was wondering if you knew any states within Michigan that were doing initiatives similar to one that was in Oklahoma City that really presided on improving the amount and the quality of public space in the city, and it was based on, it's called MAPS. The initiative was like a limited increase, like 1% increase of the city tax sales, which then they based off of.
So there's a tax to buy public space, or?
Oh, no, sorry. So it's 1% increase on sales tax.
So I'm real familiar with that. The citizens of Oklahoma City have been very generous. They have realized the value of place. Not only once, but I believe 4 times, they have voted to institute amongst themselves a sales tax and to use the proceeds of that sales tax to invest in acquisition of space adjacent to their waterways and greenways and other public space improvements. It's called MAPS. I can't remember what the acronym is. It's dramatic. It's wonderful. Here's the problem in Michigan. We can't do local sales tax generation, okay? That's a big deal. In Oklahoma, they can raise a local sales tax. That might be an issue when it's on your agenda, okay? Okay, so, but outside of that, nothing comes to mind of a particular city, okay? But I do know that there is an opportunity of, at least a couple of opportunities for raising funds or utilizing funds to that work, and what I think is the capital improvement program that's available in this valley, so.
Yeah.
You know.
The cities of Michigan, the state has spent really the last 20 years strengthening cities. Just to be a turn of the punch bowl here to end this thing. But, that's part of this turnaround. That's part of this different way of looking at the world. And I think as people's interests and the economics come together, we've got to continue to push into that direction. Because those types of ideas, I believe the mayor of Oklahoma City in the last year to speak, and what they've done has been remarkable with the river and everything else that they've tried to do to create a different atmosphere in the downtown area. It's all about the stuff that we've been speaking to. Most of those types of things aren't available to communities in Michigan.
That was all with the tax.
Yeah, so we've got to figure that out. So we've got to get the value system. It's a value system in terms of what we're going to want to do. When I talk about sort of a 20th century model, it's everything. It's everything that we work with, and it's easy to sort of blame outdated codes, but the outdated codes are part of it, and realtors not knowing how to sell it is part of it, and builders not knowing how to build it, and banks not knowing how to finance it, and pretty soon we say, well, that's not something we do around here. And we all live on the side of an 8-lane road, and people are like, well, I don't get how this happened. Of course we know how it happened. We go back and do a research paper on it, and that's the big change, and why the stuff that Jim talked about is so important. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's what we've got to do to have a puncher's chance in this new economy. I feel confident we'll get there at some point.
One more.
I think what you're doing, or you're trying to do, is really remarkably good. I think it's a very powerful way of looking at the future and trying to orient public investment in a way that's most beneficial to private development and most change generating. One of the dangers of looking at arriving at certain kinds of forms abstractly is that one limits the possible outcomes of placemaking to what we know as opposed to what we do not know or what might become a form looking forward. And I would say that the very best examples of 100-year development in the United States are those which are very complex and very incomprehensible. I think I can cite Los Angeles County as being one, Long Island being another, where you have beautiful pieces of urbanism that are generated by rail, by transit 100 years ago, which then get suburbanized and filled in by car communities, and then get re-urbanized by rail, and where the relationships of the centers and the complexity of uses is such that you cannot assign the kind of absolute value that you can by looking at downtown Chicago, for instance, or any one place, South Bend, or some definitive singular place. So the singularity of place is something to be very careful about, because you might have a very, very beautifully walkable center, but you can have 10 miles or 5 miles, forget the 10. You might have 5 miles of easy car access that makes this place triply or quadruply valuable, as opposed to every single place needing to be somehow have a walk score of 95. And the other thing I want to cite is it's also very important to look at really old and increasingly relevant old models in our country. Remember that places like Los Angeles County were generated by Henry Huntington by actually building transit to make development. So when you look at Detroit and its state of desperation at the larger development way, maybe the way to get back to it is not through building houses or housing, but through building transit and reversing the process. And in fact, the fact is that there is such a thing as transit-oriented development, which I think has to do with infilling around stations, but there's also development-oriented transit, which is the way much of our country was developed from the 1880s to the early 1910s.
Yeah. Your first point, I totally agree with. Authenticity is the most important thing we talk about placemaking. So there's got to be room in there for places to retain or to exploit the unique qualities. No question, I completely agree with that. The second point I agree with as well. We just spent 2 days talking about transit-oriented development, and even the concept of development-oriented transit. And we've got to get there. You're absolutely correct. But this is one of those things, again, where the risk that we talked about earlier doesn't necessarily line up with what's out there. And we can point out, we had the mayor of Salt Lake City, anybody from Salt Lake or done work there. I mean, we brought him in to talk about the Salt Lake transportation system, which is streetcar, BRT, and a couple other things, that has lit the place on fire, all kinds of new development. I mean, all the things happening that we kind of empirically know in this room happens when you do that, because they built it from zero. People in Michigan can't
you know, they look at New York and the subway system, it just doesn't relate to what's going on here. But Salt Lake has largely done this in the last 10 to 12 years. So we can show you on paper what that does for development, what that does for growth, what that does for competitiveness, but our systems still aren't set up to do it. Our political systems aren't, our legal and governmental systems aren't, and we've got to figure that stuff out and get honest about it, or we're going to continue to lag. So I
Detroit is
totally
a
agree.
perfect city, though, for that. It's a radial plan.
Right, correct.
It's perfectly designed.
And the roots of it are in the DFC right now. The DFC plan starts to build on that base. That's really good.
Google Detroit Rail 1913, a map will pop up of the original rail system in Detroit.
Yep.
It emanates from downtown Detroit, it goes along the mile roads, and there are spokes out to Port Huron, Pontiac, Flint, and Saginaw, all of whom have gone into receivership.
Yep.
And the entire program looks like we should build it today. I actually, one of these meetings, I put it up there, I said, no, it's a secret meeting, here's what we're going to do. And everybody's like, oh, that looks like it makes a lot of sense. It's like, well, yeah, well, the rails are still there, but it's gone. And we built 8-lane roads in every direction, people left. And that's, you know, and we're surprised by that.
So the mayor of Salt Lake City opens up by talking about, yeah, they built it by scratch, but they had the base to build from the Norman grid system, which was the layout of Salt Lake City. And that base, just like the plan in Detroit, still has value, okay, if it's utilized to its maximum. 2 words that I'll give to you, okay, which the academic in me, yes, I'm a little bit academic, okay, are still a part of this program too. One is morphology, that places change over time. Okay, and we can't block that. We can guide it, but we can't. That change has to occur. And the second is propinquity. Okay, spelled P-R-O-P-I-N-Q-U-I-T-Y. And the reason I gave that to you is because there is a science literature on propinquity which clearly shows that the more near you are of activity, the more value the activity becomes. Okay, and that raises through employment propinquity, housing propinquity, social propinquity, economic propinquity. And it ties directly to what we are doing as place-based urbanists.
Okay, thank you very much.